At 22 years old, fresh out of college, I managed to land what I thought was a dream gig. I returned to my old high school to work as a computer intern. Because I had maintained fantastic relationships with my former IT teachers, they hooked me up with a prime spot, a small, exclusive 3-person office hidden away in the cavernous, messy labyrinth of the school basement. The basement itself was a graveyard of broken desks and dusty servers. But our office was an oasis. It boasted comfortable chairs, mini fridges, a mounted flat-screen TV, and most importantly, powerful air conditioning. A luxury completely absent in the sweltering classrooms above. The only downside was its architectural design. The office didn't have a physical door, just a wide archway leading into the dark basement. Furthermore, the heavy metal door at the top of the basement stairs had a broken lock. One afternoon, my 2 co-workers, Dave and Gary, were upstairs handling some paperwork. I was alone, enjoying the quiet hum of the servers while eating a sandwich at my desk. The sudden shrill ring of the office phone shattered the peace. I answered it, expecting Gary or Dave. Instead, it was the breathless voice of a secretary from the front office. She told me the school was in full lockdown. An unidentified individual, believed to be armed, had bypassed security and was currently roaming the halls. Panic seized my chest. Because I had no door to lock, my only option was absolute concealment. I reached over and killed the overhead lights, shutting down my monitors until the office was swallowed by pitch blackness. I slid out of my chair and wedged myself underneath the heavy wooden desk, clutching my phone. I frantically texted Dave and Gary, my thumbs flying across the screen, but received no reply. I sat in the dark for 20 agonizing minutes. Down in the basement, I was completely cut off from the sounds of the school above. The silence was deafening. I had no idea if the police had arrived, if people were hurt, or if the intruder was gone. I was explicitly instructed not to call the front desk until they contacted me first. Then, a sound froze the blood in my veins. The heavy metal door at the top of the basement stairs groaned open. Its loud, rusty squeak echoed down the concrete stairwell and reverberated through the dark basement. My breath hitched in my throat. I debated calling out, desperately hoping it was Dave or Gary coming down to shelter with me. But then the footsteps began. They were heavy, deliberate, and moving slowly down the stairs. I shrank further back into the shadows beneath the desk, pulling my knees to my chest. The footsteps crossed the concrete floor, growing louder, closer. They paused right at the archway of my office. Someone stepped into the room. They didn't reach for the light switch. They just stood there, breathing quietly in the darkness. I was suffocating on my own terror. I knew that if I made even the slightest sound, a shifted shoe, an exhaled breath, I would be dead. Suddenly, with the volume of a gunshot, my cell phone emitted a sharp ping. A text message had come through. The sudden light from the screen illuminated the small space under the desk. My heart stopped. I knew it was over. The heavy footsteps immediately rushed toward my desk. Abandoning all hope, I scrambled out from under the wood, holding my hands up in complete surrender, begging blindly into the dark, "Please, please don't kill me." A strong hand grabbed my forearm and hauled me to my feet. In the glow of my phone screen, I saw a middle-aged man wearing a red plaid button-up shirt, denim jeans, and a dark, reddish-black baseball cap. He looked breathless but tried to keep his voice calm. "It's okay, son," he whispered quickly. "I'm just a parent. I was coming to pick up my kid when the alarms went off. A teacher told me to run down here and hide with you. What the hell is going on up there? I let out a shuddering breath of immense relief, my muscles turning to jelly. I don't know, I stammered. He glanced around the dark room nervously. Is there an exit down here? A way out to the street? Yeah. I pointed a trembling finger toward the back corner of the basement. Through the boiler room, there's a storm door. As I spoke, I finally glanced down at the text message that had almost given me a heart attack. It was from Dave. Dude, this is fucking crazy. Some guy with a gun just shot Mr. Buckley in the hallway. He's wearing a red plaid shirt and a black and red cap. He ran downstairs. Whatever you do, do not come up. The words blurred together as the horrifying reality slammed into my brain. I slowly raised my eyes from the glowing screen and looked at the man standing 2 feet away from me. The red plaid shirt, the dark cap. He saw the color completely drain from my face. He saw the way my eyes locked onto his clothing. The facade of the terrified parent vanished, replaced by a cold, dead stare. He reached toward his waistband. I didn't think. I just reacted. I shoved him backward with all the adrenaline my body could muster and bolted for the stairs. I scrambled up the concrete steps on my hands and knees in the pitch black. Halfway up, a deafening explosion ripped through the basement. The gunshot echoed violently against the concrete, and I heard the bullet ricochet off the metal railing just inches from my head. I burst through the door into the main hallway, practically falling into the arms of 2 heavily armed SWAT officers. I screamed at them that the shooter was in the basement heading for the back exit. The police swarmed the building and apprehended the man exactly as he tried to push open the storm door I had just directed him toward. Miraculously, Mr. Buckley survived the gunshot wound to his chest. It was later revealed that the shooter had some sort of deep-seated delusional grievance against the teacher, though the exact motive was never released to the public. All I know is that to this day, the deafening echo of that gunshot in the dark basement still wakes me up in a cold sweat. It was a typical, agonizingly slow Friday afternoon. The 7th period calculus class dragged on, heavily saturated with the collective exhaustion of high school students yearning for the weekend. Spring break was hovering just around the corner, casting a restless, antsy energy over the entire room. Unlike our peers who were currently sweating through exams in other departments, our teacher was blissfully laid back. Sensing our complete inability to focus on numbers and equations, he had abandoned the lesson plan entirely. Instead, we were huddled around the projector screen, casually playing a brand logo trivia game on sporkle.com. I remember the exact mundane detail of the moment everything shifted. My friend had just shouted out the correct answer to a logo on the screen: Adidas. Almost before the word finished echoing in the room, the PA system crackled to life with a harsh, static hiss. It was the dean's voice, but it was stripped of its usual stern, authoritative calm. He sounded breathless, frantic, and unmistakably terrified. He barked a single chilling instruction to all faculty members. This was not a drill. The school was going into immediate lockdown. An icy wave of dread washed over me, raising the hairs on my arms. Our usually relaxed teacher physically jumped at the announcement. The playful atmosphere evaporated instantly as panic overtook his features. He scrambled to the wall, slamming his hand against the light switches, plunging the room into shadows and frantically motioning for us to huddle in the back corner, away from the door and windows. For 2 agonizing minutes, we sat in absolute, suffocating silence. The only sound was the low, steady electrical hum of a control panel at the back of the room. Then abruptly, even that sound died. The school had completely cut the main power. The sudden, profound quiet was infinitely more terrifying than the noise. We exchanged wide-eyed, pale glances in the dim light. This was not a precaution. Something was terribly wrong. A few minutes later, the silence was shattered by a sound that will forever be burned into my memory. A man was screaming at the absolute top of his lungs, his voice echoing violently down the main hallway outside our door. 2 girls sitting near me began to sob softly, the quiet sounds of their terror amplifying the tension in the room. As the heavy, frantic footsteps drew closer, the man's incoherent roaring became distinct words. He began violently slamming his fists, or perhaps a heavy object against the metal lockers, bellowing, "I'll kill all of you!" My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. My teacher put a trembling finger to his lips, silently pleading for absolute quiet. Then, the violent banging left the lockers and transferred to our classroom door. The heavy wood shuddered under the immense force. One of the crying girls let out an involuntary muffled squeak of pure terror. The man outside heard it. He began to pound relentlessly on our door, screaming like a rabid animal, demanding we open up. It felt like hours passed in that corner, trapped in the dark while a lunatic tried to break through the only barrier keeping us alive. Eventually, mercifully, his screams and footsteps faded further down the hall until the silence returned. When the dean finally came back over the intercom an eternity later, he explained that a mentally unstable intruder had walked through the front doors, brutally assaulted the receptionist, and sent her fleeing into the street in terror. Without modern security cameras or guards, the staff had lost him in the maze of hallways. The most horrifying detail didn't emerge until later. A night shift janitor eventually found the man fast asleep in a dark storage closet near the back of the building. Protruding from his jacket pocket was a loaded .44 Magnum. By the time the janitor carelessly slammed the closet door and ran to call the police, the man had woken up and vanished into the night, leaving us with a permanent, lingering paranoia that he might one day return. My middle school operated on a chaotic, 2-tier lunch schedule. The first shift accommodated the 6th and 7th graders, while the second was reserved for the older 8th grade class. The lockdown occurred on a bleak, miserable day in early October. The sky was an unbroken blanket of dark gray clouds, and heavy rain lashed against the cafeteria windows, setting a gloomy, oppressive mood. We were in the middle of the first lunch period. The cafeteria was a deafening sea of adolescent chatter and clinking trays. Suddenly, cutting through the noise and the torrential rain outside, 4 massive concussive booms echoed through the air. Given the weather, my initial naive thought was that it was a freak cluster of thunderclaps. However, the immediate, sheer panic that erupted across the room told a different story. Hundreds of kids began screaming in unison. I distinctly remember thinking that everyone was overreacting to the storm, until the campus security guards burst through the double doors. They weren't just directing us, they were shoving people, their faces pale, screaming at the top of their lungs for everyone to immediately evacuate into the massive multi-purpose room adjacent to the cafeteria. Kids abandoned half-eaten meals. Those waiting in the hot food line were forced to drop their trays entirely as a stampede of terrified students flooded into the secure area. The multi-purpose room was cavernous, but its most prominent feature was a massive, floor-to-ceiling glass wall at the back that looked out onto the street and the residential houses opposite the school. As we poured into the room, staff members were desperately yanking the heavy blackout curtains closed over the glass, effectively blinding us to the outside world. Adults immediately barricaded every exit. My friend Eric, unable to contain his anxiety, crept over to a pale-faced teacher guarding the side door and whispered a question. When he returned to our huddle, he looked sick. He reminded us of the dilapidated houses situated right across the street from the school grounds. According to the teacher, a deeply disturbed, mentally disabled man had barricaded himself inside one of those houses. He was heavily armed, threatening to murder any police officer who approached, and threatening to take his own life to prevent an impending eviction. Worse still, before barricading himself, he had been seen pacing the perimeter of the school grounds, staring at the students with a chilling, predatory intensity. To add a sickening layer to the dread, rumors began circulating, later confirmed, that the man was a registered sex offender. We were trapped in that stuffy, crowded room for over an hour, the tension thick enough to choke on. When the SWAT team finally neutralized the situation and we were slowly escorted back to our classrooms, my friend Brandy confessed a detail that made my blood run cold. She lived next door to the man. The previous Halloween, she had looked out her window and seen him standing in his living room, staring directly at her house. He had a deep gash on his arm and was using his own blood to smear a message on the glass. "Don't come here or I'll kill you." At the time, she had brushed it off as a disturbed, overly dedicated Halloween prank. Now, knowing what he was truly capable of, the memory of that bloody warning felt like a terrifying brush with death.
Now remember, keep your lights on and your doors locked. Then subscribe for more horrifying true stories.